Sexual harassment cases are on the rise according to the numbers. A shocking 50% of women aged 18 to 30 have experienced one form of sexual harassment. On this episode of Women Talk, we're going to be discussing the devastation that sexual harassment brings into the lives of those it affects, but also about what we're doing about it. My name is Deborah Henry.
My name is Zoraya Vadillo, and thank you so much for joining us here today for a much more serious topic. I'd like to invite our two guests who will be joining us to speak about this today. Datuk David Morais, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Zoraya and Deborah.
And Emellia, Shariff, thank you.
My pleasure.
It's an absolute honour to have the both of you here today to speak about something that is quite serious, that we've had a lot of progress in the last couple of years, but there's still a lot more to do.
Yeah. Can I ask how both of you actually got into, very deeply into the big challenging issue of sexual harassment? Perhaps we can start with you, David.
This particular client had her case coming up to the federal court. And it was quite a big challenge for her then lawyers, and they were looking for senior counsel, and her team of lawyers had worked with me before, and they were friends of hers, and so they brought them to see me. So when I looked at the case and I looked at her and looked at her background and why she's bringing this case, I was quite impressed by her courage. She's a fairly a middle-class, simple lady, single woman. She'd been treated very shoddily by her boss, who, on top of that, he sued her for defamation. He said that her allegations against her.
That seems to be a trend, though.
Well, what he said was the allegations had not been proved in the disciplinary proceedings that held by her employer. And because the allegations hadn't been proved, she could not have made those allegations, and they were defamatory of him. So she set out precisely what had happened between them, gave all the instances, and the case wasn't particularly well formulated, but it had some legs. And the High Court judge was sympathetic to her. She found that those allegations were true, and that was quite critical. So the defamation action was chucked out, and the counterclaim for the harassment was found true. Went to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal affirmed it, and the Court of Appeal judges also tried to then formulate the law, and they used some pretty archaic law, but it was you could get it across the line, and then he'd taken it up to the federal court.
Can I ask, though, when it comes to something like this, so it was difficult initially for her to prove that anything had happened. If another woman was in a situation similar to hers, what is the immediate thing that should be done? Well,
I mean, this goes back to what should you do in your workplace when something like this happens. She did what was provided for her there, which was she complained to her CEO. 3 months later, they held some sort of inquiry, but it was pretty shoddy, to be frank. To be fair.
Well, Emellia, can we talk a little bit about the definitions of sexual harassment and everything it encompasses?
When you're really trying to come up with a comprehensive definition that covers all aspects of sexual harassment, it needs to have three different things. Number one, sexual harassment is any form of unwanted conduct. That's the first element. The second element is it has to be of a sexual nature, because if it's not sexual, then it's just harassment. And the third element is it must have some form of negative impact onto the person or the person's environment. So it could be I'm affected mentally or emotionally, or it could be that it creates an environment that is so hostile, so intimidating, so unsafe for me to work in or for me to go to school, that it creates sexual harassment because I'm a victim of it. So if you're looking at definition, these are the three ingredients that they must have.
But we're going to take a quick break now. When we come back, we're actually going to be, we have exclusive footage of two Malaysian models who actually have found the courage to share their stories with us. That's coming up after this. harassment can happen anytime, anywhere, although it happens mostly at the workplace. But I wanted to ask you, Emellia and David, as it stands now today, if one of us were victims of sexual harassment, what would I do? There
is some laws that you can rely on, but when we talk about victims, usually we tell them you should do 4 things. Number 1, as soon as you're sexually harassed, you want to record the details of the sexual harassment. This is important because if one day you decide to go to court, you decide to complain to your companies, you can rely on, a series of facts that you already write about.
So you just write it yourself?
Write it yourself. Usually we tell survivors you need to send an email to yourself because it has the date and time, so people can't say, oh, you totally made this up. We would also advise victims, secondly, to tell the perpetrator to stop doing it. And this is important because you might want to give people the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes people are raised a certain way, they think this is normal, they think this is acceptable. So setting your boundaries is very important. So for example, I may say something right now that you feel uncomfortable about. So you might want to say, hey, not cool. Let's not do that again. And if I'm not like a malicious person, I'll be like, I'm so sorry, didn't mean for that. Won't do it again, right? But if I'm a predator, it would be a totally different situation. So take your time. Once you're ready, you can make a complaint, and then you take the case from there.
It's also this thing of people not wanting to say anything, but then, I mean, recently this case of going out on social media and like defaming and things like that. I mean, is that...
Well, not everything has to go to the police. I mean, a lot of these things are not necessarily criminal behavior. It's just, I use a very loose term, antisocial behavior that obviously causes distress and harm to the victim. So a lot of that can be contained within a structure, within the, say, your employment structure, within your organization. And it should be, unless, of course, it transgresses from harassment into assault, into abuse.
And that's exactly the problem with status quo, right? Oh, if it's not serious enough, you don't have a cause of action. And I think that's why it's so important to push for the anti-sexual harassment bill. Because while these wrongdoings or actions may not necessarily be a criminal one or something that falls within the definitions of the penal code, for example, they are sexual harassment nonetheless, they are wrong nonetheless, and therefore when we talk about the need for a comprehensive anti-sexual harassment bill, it should provide an avenue for people to bring their case to a place that is less intimidating than the criminal justice system.
I mean, what you were explaining before the break as well, I mean, the definition of what sexual harassment is. There are also a lot of spaces there where it's quite vague and open to interpretation. I mean, did it affect me? Well, some people may say, no, it didn't hurt you negatively, and others will say, well, no, I experienced it, so I would know. And so in that, a definition is maybe would help.
Not just the definition, but I think what Emellia says about having the act coming through is quite important because the tort, if you're going to sue for the tort of sexual harassment, you have to prove damage and injury to yourself. So in Asma's case, she was able to show that she went to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist gave her a report that said she was suffering from depression and other anxiety-related diseases, conditions because of the harassment. So we had that evidence, and that is a limitation and a qualification to bring in action for sexual harassment in court. Whereas if you look at the act doesn't actually require you to prove that you have been injured. The fact that you are affected by this behavior, that your dignity has been affected, that your safety and your sense of security has been affected, that is enough to invoke your right to bring in your case to a tribunal under the
Because
Act.
you don't want people to abuse that, right, as well.
I've had a look at the Act. Obviously, you are the expert on that. The limitation in the Act is that it's a bit of a hybrid between a conciliatory approach or a mediatory approach and a legal approach, because the standards which are applied under the Act, the evidence that you have to prove, the standard of proof that you have to bring are legal standards.
But they're lower than the standard that is applied in a criminal law.
It's lower than standard applied in criminal law, but it's still on the balance of probability. So you still have to prove your case with evidence, and not if you apply the Evidence Act to this tribunal, and that appears to be what it does. you're then, and then there's a supervisory role in the court. So the court, if you're not happy with the judgment, you think it's perverse, you could take it to the High Court.
Right.
Now, a High Court judge looks at this and says, how did you accept this, hearsay evidence? How did you accept this uncorroborated evidence? Where's all the other elements of evidence that we require before we make a case?
Because we've been talking a lot about sort of the theory of it all, right, and the law, and it can sometimes it's difficult to wrap your head around it, I think. But I want us to watch this video, and this is really two celebrated Malaysian models. They actually share, I think for the first time, in fact, their experiences with sexual harassment, and maybe then we can kind of also understand what victims go through in a very real way, and then we'll jump back into the conversation.
I actually experienced sexual harassment in e-hailing and also in my industry, sometimes with certain people that I just met when I just started modeling career. So what happened was I didn't have enough cash to pay. He suggested me if I want to offer anything else and start to turn back and touch my, I'm like, no.
I was very young, I think about three years old or 3 or 4 years old. So my dad was working, and my mom, she used to do business. And so she met this one lady, and they are not from very well-to-do family. So the lady's son, he actually wanted to come to KL, and he wanted to study here. So my mom was like, she was very nice, and she offered help, and she said that, okay, your son can come and stay with us. This guy, he offered help, saying that, oh, auntie, you can go for your business and all, I'll take care of your daughters. So it was me and my sister. So every night when he get the chance, he will call me to his room, touch me where he's supposed to not touch, and but I was just like, I feel so numb. It happened so many times, and my dad, he started to notice, there was marks on our body, on my body, there was pinch marks and everything. But I think my mom also saw what he was doing to me. My dad got so angry, and my dad, I think, nearly killed him. And and my mom stopped him, and they chased him out from the house. I have moved on from that particular incident, but when I hear other people's story, and I tend to remember what happened to me. Till then, I think my mom, after that incident, she never leave us to anyone. In this case, my parents really were there for me, to come out from this whole incident. So yeah, it's just that sometimes I think about it. Yeah, I'm just shivering.
Wow. It's always so difficult to listen to stories like that. You just, it really makes you feel something so powerful of just anger or something,
And it's striking that it's it happened to her when she was
so
this
young.
Little, this young, and it's still
worse,
real raw. It sticks with people that long.
I'm sure, and I'm sure it takes a while before she's able to articulate her thoughts. I'm sure this isn't something that she spoke about when she was 3, or she must have spoken about it much later in her life.
I mean, many sexual abuse survivors say this thing of they feel numb. They felt numb when it was happening, and
you hide it.
You hide it.
Well, she's a 3-year-old child. What would she know? What would she understand? What's going on?
They don't have the tools, the skills to process it, to digest it, to separate herself from the act that happened to her. Is it her fault? What could she have done differently? So all of these things, it takes years sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, we should talk about what we can do to fix it.
Yeah, we should. And we're going to take a quick break now. When we come back, we're going to be talking about the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act that we're all hoping, fingers crossed, is put into place.
We'll get passed.
I feel sort of disappointed saying this, but the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act has been in discussion for 2 decades, I believe.
Longer
than that. I mean, it's
almost 30 years.
It's baffling that it's not been you know, we've not done the right thing. Can we just quickly talk about like where we stand with it now, and what are your hopes, you know?
So the bill has passed the first reading, but women's group CSOs are not quite happy with what's currently in the bill and wanted to propose a series of amendments for improvement. So very quickly, we want to add a few new sections, and we also want to improve certain existing sections. Some of the biggest things that are not in the bill that should have been, number one, protection against victimization, because really if victims are not protected for speaking up, then your problems of underreporting will never be solved.
Yes.
Secondly, we're trying to introduce a positive duty for employers and organizations, including schools, public spaces operators, all of those organizations, to actually take an active duty to prevent sexual harassment from happening to begin with, especially now in light of the amendment to the Employment Act. So we have heftier fines now. But what can we do to actually guide these organizations? How can we tell them what to do so that they can avoid this liability, right? So I think all of these things are very, very important. With this addition, I really hope that victims will be more protected when they speak up, because really this shouldn't be that hard.
Exactly.
You know, like it's speaking about your lived experiences, it's getting help, it's access to justice.
That shouldn't be the reason why people actually remain quiet,
Exactly.
silent. And David, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, it's a good step in the right direction. It's long overdue. I think it could be. I mean, it's quite a simple bill if you look at the way it's drafted. There could be a little bit more complexity and certainty as to how this tribunal is to work. Some timelines, make it shorter, make it quicker, make it more conciliatory, make it easier for victims to speak. Make it fair. It's got to be fair, because it's got to be fair for victims as well as for those who are accused. But it needs to be, as Emellia says, it needs to be in a safe space. It needs to be efficient, and you need to have personnel who are running it who are really experts in what they're doing. If you're sitting there with you know 5 lawyers around you who are just lawyers, not good enough.
But are we close to having it pass?
I would say we are hopeful, cautiously hopeful, that our amendments are being reviewed by the AGC, being looked at by the right people with, you know, the right power to push this through. I really hope it will be passed in the next parliamentary sitting. That would be July this year.
Wow. All right, that's quite soon, actually.
That is very soon. And what final thoughts, comments could we make? Could we share with viewers at home? Because the statistics say that 50% of women. So. Yes. The chances are you know somebody in your close circle that has experienced some form, right?
Oh, yeah.
So what can these women do to support each other? And men too, because it can happen to men.
Yes, exactly. That's something to remember.
Number one, it's important to remember that sexual harassment can happen to anyone regardless of gender, socioeconomic status, race, religion, doesn't matter. You could be wearing a telekung and still be sexually harassed.
Yes.
But secondly, my message is, before I talk to victims or potential victims, I like to talk to perpetrators and potential perpetrators. Don't sexually harass people. If someone comes up to you and say, I'm not comfortable with that, or you're a human being, you can look at people's body language, the way they respond to you. If you can sense that people are uncomfortable, stop.
Yes.
Really.
For victims, though, take your time. Whenever you're ready to talk about your case, there are options available, there are help available. Reach out, and hopefully we can get you to where you need to be, you know, some form of justice.
That's a brilliant message to both perpetrator and victim. Thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you both for being here with us today. It's been an absolute honour speaking about this very important subject.
And I think for all of those, in any capacity, you're empowered to do something about it. So schools, institutions, religious institutions, small or big, we can all be the eyes and ears on the ground to support one another. Because very often it is that power imbalance, right?
But, you know,
it's someone who's more powerful than the other.
Frankly, it starts at home, and you know, fathers have to teach their sons, have to educate their sons and their daughters. Daughters to speak up, sons to behave themselves and to understand and respect women, because this is substantially an issue between men and harassing women.
Wonderful. I think that's a very nice way to bring it to the close. Many things start at home: education and conversation.
Certainly, the family structure is everything. So if you feel like you need to speak to someone, go to your family and find that support. And if you can't go to them, go to your friends. But there's always someone listening. Reach out to us if you need to as well, if you need help or need to just speak about it. And yes.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Emellia, for joining us on the show
us
today. And thank you, guys. Take care, and we will see you soon.
I actually experienced sexual harassment in e-hailing. It's an experience that I will forever remember. So I was from KL to Cyberjaya. I was being very vocal about it, and I say, you better stop me or I will make a report about you. I have your information here. I said, so he was like, okay, don't make a report, I'll stop you at the side of the road. Yeah, it happened twice. So the second time, I just go on with the ride because it was only 10 minutes away. But by the time I arrived, I just left and I make a report. But I told him also, look, I said, I don't like what you're doing to me earlier. I said, like, you tried to touch me. I feel like it's not appropriate.